three main organizers for Youth Power PDX. And so to start off uh, our panel today, I want to just talk about Youth Power PDX, what it is, and yeah. So Youth Power PDX is a youth organization right now taking on systemic oppression from an intersectional point of view. Youth Power PDX aims to give youth a place to connect, grow, and organize through the potency of youth power. We do this by centering BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, and queer stories and voices through the crossroads of story, music, visual art, and activism. So every Monday we have a radio show, or every Monday we're on a radio show, X-Ray FM, and then on Thursdays we have a sing out on Instagram Live where we showcase artists, and then on Sundays we have our speaker series, which is what we're having today. And the last two Sundays I've had different youth speakers come on. I actually had Asakulu my first week, who's back on again today. And then last week I had Tasnim, which you all are familiar with. And yeah, and so today I really wanted to do a panel, and I really wanted to talk about police abolition just because I think that that's a conversation that a lot of people are having right now, just with current events and with a lot that has been happening in our country. And so I decided to invite, three of my homies, Ahlam, Asakulu, and Taji, who, just do great work in our community and who have done a lot of work in terms of, in terms of violence or policing. And they're all Black youth who are well known in our community, who have done so much. And so I'm going to start off by reading each of you guys' biography or your bios. So Ahlam Osman describes herself as a youth community organizer and student. She has held leadership positions for grassroot and nonprofit organizations such as Momentum Alliance and the Somali Empowerment Circle. Ahlam's project over the years has focused on several issues relating to social, racial, and environmental justice for youth of color and Black Muslim youth in the greater Portland area. Ahlam has recently dedicated her local work and support towards empowering and advocating for the Somali diaspora on a policy and institutional level in Portland. Ahlam is starting at Portland State University in the fall as an urban and public affairs major with a focus on community development and aspires to be an urban planner. And then we have Asakulu. Asakulu Sangolo is a child of refugees from DR Congo and an immigrant from Zambia. Currently serving as the director of the Congo Peace Project, a grassroots charity organization focused on menstrual and educational equity, Asakulu would describe himself as an organizer for international Black liberation. Involved in his school's Black Student Union and recently getting interested in local politics, he's always down for some conversation and good food. He's a rising senior at Central Catholic High School in Southeast Portland, but in the near future, Asakulu hopes to become a human rights lawyer, social entrepreneur, and continue his work as an organizer. And then we have Taji with us today as well. And Taji exists as a curator of Voices and a Listener. Taji is an incoming freshman at the University of Chicago, studying international relations with a minor in criminology. He's also the co-founder of Youth Educating Police, a nonprofit created to address the stain on our national police force. Taji congruently addresses this issue through the implementation of police training curriculums with the heightened focus on youth of color and community engaged policing. How does that sound, y'all? Did I do good?
Yeah, awesome job.
Yes. Is there anything else you all would like to add? Okay, sweet. All right. So I'm just going to be asking a few questions for you all around, police abolition, and then we will also have after I ask a few questions, we're on live, and so if there's people who are on the live and want to ask questions, they'll be able to ask questions as well. Yeah. And so I think to start off, I really want us to be able to define what police abolition really means. And so I would like everyone on the panel The question I have for you all is, what does police abolition mean to you, and how would you define police abolition?
I can start if that's okay. Awesome. So thank you all. Thank you so much for that introduction, Faisal. That was great. For my personal definition of abolition, I think strays away from thinking of abolition as synonymous with defunding the police. I think defunding the police is a more direct route and a more actionable route to take when it comes to talking about public safety. Specifically in regards to abolition, as a concept, I believe I'm an abolitionist, and I believe in the concepts of abolition in regards to policing, but also in regards to the prison industrial complex. However, when we're talking about how that action really looks, I think of defunding, and I think of because you can't just think of turning a switch and tomorrow police are gone, because I don't think there's a city council in the entire country that would do that or vote on that or pass that, because for too long now we've sort of gone through the route of, okay, how do we have a safer community, and really all we've thought of is more policing, and we haven't thought of ulterior motives that we may, or sorry, not ulterior motives, alternative motives that we may take for social, for public safety, which, talking about better education, better social services. So I think of those sorts of things when I think about abolition. Same thing with the prison industrial complex, as it's rooted in white supremacy and rooted in a concept of reform. They didn't abolish slavery with the 13th Amendment. They had a caveat in regards to servitude for those who are in prison or those who are convicted of a crime. And so that idea of itself in prisons is also just another reform, which has led to things like mass incarceration. And I could go on, but that's sort of my overarching idea of abolition, and specifically in regards to policing in prisons.
Thank you. Yeah. And then our other panelists.
Taji basically summed it up for me. I do believe in having police abolition, and I think one of the only ways that we can do that is through getting rid of police completely. And also it also means I do think funding is an important part, like defunding the police, and instead allocating money towards the community and towards community projects that are meant to protect the people instead of relying on police. And also doing it on a much higher, on an institutional level, obviously that's going to take a really long time. But I do think one of the first steps would be through definitely defunding the police, and eventually getting rid of them. So.
Yeah, I agree with everything y'all said. But I think at the heart of defunding the police is also the realization for people that believe in reform or changing how we do things is the police in America started as the runaway slave patrol, and they've just evolved. And then around the world, policing systems have always held together capitalist societies, which are always going to put profit over people, and so originating protecting property. So we need to defund the police, and it's not hard to think. It's hard to think of defunding the police, but when you realize that things like education is getting defunded, then you realize our priorities aren't straight. We need to dramatically change the way we do things.
Yeah, so I think, what I'm hearing from our panelists is that abolition, or the reason for police abolition is the fact that the way policing is set up institutionally, it's to uphold white supremacy and capitalism. And that what abolition looks at is divesting funds from that institution and allocating those funds to resources for communities to be in charge of the way that they look at safety. and also to invest those funds um, in resources that help support communities of color rather than locking up people of color. And so my next question for you all is, what's the difference between reform and abolition? And who's calling for reform and who's calling for abolition? Anyone can go.
I guess I'll like take this first. I think like the biggest thing. Wait, did you ask like what's the difference? Okay,
Yeah.
so like the way that I'd interpret the difference is like reform is people believing that you can restructure the way police do their job, um, as opposed to abolition is like you can't restructure the way a cop does their job because at the heart of what they do, like it is like an oppressive system. Like at the heart of what they do, like they enforce an oppressive system, and so like we need to take that away and like find a different way and like reimagine public safety. But I feel like the people that are calling most for reforms are um, people like in power, right? The people that have like decision making powers. I feel like a lot of the times you have this like need to be like practical when you're like a decision maker, like a policy maker, a lawmaker. Like you feel as though you need to be like practical and like you can't dream big, and you can't think about things that just haven't necessarily been done on like a large scale, like defunding and later abolishing the police. And so like we've observed it with like our mayor, with like people actively like over 100,000 people like messaging city council and like our mayor and trying to get them to defund the police, and them like a majority of them going, we need to like reimagine public safety, but we're going to do that through reforming, because again like it's hard for them to dream big and think about these systems like going away and replacing them with something different.
Yeah, definitely. I agree.
I think there was a really poignant guide that Mariambe Kaba, who is a police abolitionist or prison abolitionist based out of Chicago, and leads a really good organization. Can't think of the name off the top of my head. However, in 2014, she wrote a guide around reform and like how do we look at reform specifically in the wake of the Obama's 21st century task force on policing, and sort of the reforms that were put out through there, like things like implicit bias training, which across the board has been proven to not lead to substantially less criminalization of communities of color, specifically because it isn't an implicit issue, it's an explicit issue that we're facing right now, especially with the way policing is inextricably tied to violence and tied to the violence of the communities that are least or that are most disenfranchised. And Mariame, speaks specifically on a guide of like what reforms are good and what reforms are bad. And I think she talks about reform when it talks about the increasing of police funding as bad, increasing of police officers as bad, and then talks about things that are more beneficial and that lead towards better solutions like investing in community funding, as we've all talked about, but also things like data transparency and things like personal liability insurance for officers when they're, when crimes and murders committed, those sorts of things where they have to, be held accountable for those things on a larger scale. Things like oversight committees, which are, things that my organization YEP advocates for and on our policy level. And so, I think it's sort of tied together. There's things you have to do in the transition towards a more community-based model of public safety that would be beneficial as we sort of look towards alternatives to policing. So that's sort of what I think of it in total. And I think a lot of people have this idea around reform that, you know, the folks that want the Band-Aid are white people, or only, you know, but there are a lot of older generations of Black folks and communities of color that understand policing as another, you know, tool that they need. They need to call them when there's an instance in their community and they don't know what to do. They have these ideas around, you know, what we need to have police for, and it's not just in a monolithic way of looking at it. However, that's just because for too long now, elected officials have told us, you know, this is what we will do for safety. We will give you more police officers. And they really have always said no to all these other things, like more funding in schools, more funding for mental health crisis workers, more funding for counselors in schools. These things have always been said, no, we don't have the money for it, the budget's too tight. We spend over 50% of our budget on policing in a lot of large cities across the country. We have the funding. We spend it to militarize, state-sanctioned violence, and it just doesn't really, we haven't been able to capitulate anything beyond that because it's just not ever worked, and we've never been told yes, and we've never been told that here's another idea, here's another solution. So it's across the board. People have always been misinformed about how we can go about changing public safety.
I echo what everyone else said. Additionally, I feel like a lot of the work that I've done that's been anti-violence and anti-police, like I noticed that like now that I think about it, like a lot of it is like reform work, because its prime goal is to to make the to basically revitalize and to revitalize the relationship between police and Black folks, or youth of color. And I think ever since I started doing that work, I'm kind of realizing that it's really difficult, because most of the time the police wouldn't show up or wouldn't be able to make time to engage with us, or to actually work with us, and to have real conversations with us. And I think that's one of the reasons why reformation, or reforming the ways reforming police would be really difficult, just because there's it's not really youth, or I guess bettering the community and things like that, for them isn't really prioritized. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that makes sense. And I think that, a lot of the work in terms of responding to police brutality before this year has been reform. And I think that the way a lot of people visualize or envision change is through just reforming state-sanctioned violence, as Taji said. But I think that, yeah, a lot of what you all are saying is abolition really is the true way of the way that we see change, especially for our own Black community. And so my next, I guess, just kind of a question is what, do you feel reform can lead to abolition? Because I think, again, a lot of the work that we do right now is around police reform. And you all can talk more about it, but abolition is eventually just changing or just getting rid of the whole entire police force. But I think that what a lot of people argue is sometimes reform can bring change within that institution. But do you think, again, abolition isn't something that happens right away? It's gradually going towards abolition. So do you think that reform is the path towards abolition?
Yeah, I think about specifically Campaign Zero. It's a national organization. They put out, I would say within less than a week of George Floyd's murder, the 8 to Can't Wait, which was a series of policies that would substantially decrease use of force by police officers, I believe by 72%. And it kind of blew up in their face a lot of folks were like, you know, across the board, we understand that there's a lot of cities that already have most, or if not all of these policies. I believe Minneapolis had like 6 of 8 or 7 of 8 of those policies. And, you know, the instance still happened there. And similarly in other cities, Portland has 6 of the 8 of those policies. And then another organization, I believe maybe based out of New York, I want to say, don't quote me on that, put out an 8 to Abolition, talking about, you know, the steps to take towards abolition and what that looked like. But I think to your question, Faisal, I think about, you know, what my organization does, Youth Educating Police, and how our form does not legitimize, policing, and it really fundamentally questions and tests policing and tests something that's been tested since, you know, the 1994 crime bill. People have been trying to figure out, what does community policing look like? What does reform look like? And we have received a lot of answers. And I would say policing's better now than it was 5 years ago. But that doesn't mean that, you know, people aren't still dying, that the 1,000+ people aren't dying every year from police violence. And so, you know, it's a very nuanced thing. And I think that as people become more acquainted with abolition and the movement of that, you look to folks who have been professing this for a very long time. But I don't think we would be able to be where we are today if it wasn't for the circumstances where you're in. I think coupled with the pandemic and with the situation with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Rayshard Brooks, and I could go on and on, people are sort of fed up. But we've been fed up. And I think a lot of people are sort of realizing that, you know, a lot of Black and Indigenous people of color have been saying this is an issue, have been saying policing doesn't work, have been saying they want an alternative. But, you know, other folks have been putting the snoozing that issue, snoozing the issue elected officials have been. And as we, you know, have all these situations and how they've compounded so that these national protests are not stopping, right? It's not in the situation that, you know, I've heard in spoken words in the past. I think I've even mentioned like, oh, well, we'll have someone who dies, Trayvon Martin, you know, Sandra Bland, and then, you know, people forget about it in a week or 2 weeks and media stops reporting that. Media stopped reporting on the protests as much as they previously were, stopped being on the ground until 3 a.m. in the morning. But it's not stopping, right? People across the board, not just Black and Indigenous folks, but white people and other folks are continuously, you know, standing up and saying like, this is wrong. I am recognizing an inequality in a multitude of areas in the country, which we've all been saying, but I guess it's really just recognizing that issue, and it's becoming this larger conversation and larger move towards transformative change. Don't know if that answered your question.
So for me, I think like I think abolishing the police is something that's still kind of like, it's still really difficult for a lot of people to grasp and like to imagine and envision a world without police. So I think our focus should, like, for people who do believe in like reforming the police, I think the focus should be on abolishing, like eventually, like that's like the end goal, you know. And I think the reason why, I mean, I think a lot of the folks who are stuck on reforming aren't really willing to work towards abolishing and like to really like understand like what abolishing the police means, like what abolishing like ICE, you know, means. So I think it's important to really grasp and like understand how that would work. And it's not something that takes days or weeks. It's something that you would have to ponder over and like, you know, read about, you know, for months, you know, maybe even like years, you know. But I do think that like a lot of like, for example, like Taji's nonprofit, like you guys are focusing a lot on like reform, and I do think that that like really helps, and like it also really like contributes to eventually like leading to like abolishing and like and whatnot. So yeah.
Sorry. I think a lot of the issue with people, for people that believe in reform. I feel like a lot of the issue is like, what do we do with like mass murderers or like people that will like break into your house in the middle of the night? And I think I posted this on my Instagram, but it was like a video that I watched that was like a commentary off of Trevor Noah's post about social contracts. And this author, I can't remember her name right now, but she very passionately just like talks about how the social contract between Black people in America and the government and the people that enforce laws have been broken. And she talks about how the people more concerned with the looting and the rioting are like, should be more outraged about like the death and the consistent deaths of like Black people at the hands of state-sanctioned violence. And I think that got me like down the wormhole of like examining why a lot of my work has been like thinking about reform and like trying to get involved with projects that work on like talking to police and like engaging with them. And then it just like brought me to like conclusions and then also like thoughts about like, well, when we like think about people stealing or like breaking in or doing those things, like why are we thinking about like those huge pictures when like we could be investing in like education and like mentorship program and different things that wouldn't cause people to even feel the need to like break into your house and steal something, right? And so like that was a big thing. In her video she said, why we need to think about why someone feels like they need to smash glass and walk through glass to obtain something that they need. And I think that's the questions that we should be asking. And those are the people we need to be reaching towards and talking to and giving them the resources like from the time before they even like are conceived, like have those resources like ready for them so the world is like inviting, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think also,
no, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say like I think also we need to reframe our thinking and like wonder like why we think like like I guess like think about the ways like why do we think like every people deserve punishment, and like think about like how we see punishment, like who deserves it. Like for example, like I remember like a few years ago, Patrick Timmons, he was murdered by the Portland Police Bureau, and a lot of people are saying he deserved to die just because he retaliated. And it's like, why do like it doesn't matter, like it's like why should a police officer shoot someone just because they retaliated? Like aren't they trained like to deal with those kind of people, or like shouldn't there be other ways of like communicating before like shooting someone? So like yeah, I think kind of like what Asakuru said, like we need to shift the ways that we think.
Right. And what Asakulu was hinting at was the concept of broken window policing, which is something that was rooted in the aftermath of the war on drugs. And the professor Alex Vitale, who's one of the leaders in talking about the abolition of policing, and wrote the book The End of Policing, which is a really great book if people are looking for more information. He talks about what are police tasked with doing? Everything from dealing with folks who are experiencing houselessness, to dealing with domestic violence, to dealing with instances of drugs or immigration or kidnappings or murders. They are or school safety, for example. As we're all young people, we've seen school resource officers, and we're having that conversation in Portland. They're tasked with all of these things, and they're tasked with dealing with the social issues at the back end rather than looking at the origins of those issues. What led to officers in our schools? That was the 1994 crime bill that was put out, and it talked specifically about an expansion of officers by 100,000 more, and increasing sentences for folks who are having low level drug offenses. We had this ideology that to solve this issue of drugs, or to solve this issue of, gang members, is to then kill people, or is to then increase violence, is to give someone with a gun to go deal with an instance of someone dealing with a mental health crisis. And it's what's led to it. The DOJ settlement agreement in Oregon that started in 2012 originated out of an excessive use of force from Portland Police Bureau on specifically individuals experiencing mental health crises. So it's like we aren't looking at the fact that police are tasked with majority of our social issues, rather than trying to solve those social issues. Why the concept of a super predator, which, if you're not familiar, is the term they use to talk about young Black and brown folks who were in schools who were then going to lead to go join gangs, or who selling drugs. They titled them this insane term that made them seem like they were horrible criminals by the time they were born, that they had to have officers in our schools in order to stop those predators from super predators from doing those things. That's what led to what we have now, which is a school resource officer, which deals with instances of higher crimes. However, it just perpetuates the school to prison pipeline, which I could just continue talking about, but it just doesn't add up, right? And we don't have the solutions because we've always sort of defaulted to policing as that solution for social issues.
Yeah, definitely. I think that yeah, like what abolition addresses is that what abolition would address is the root causes of why people, I think it would be about identifying the root causes of the issues that communities have. And I think that for so long we expect police officers to fill the hats of a social worker, or someone who works on like a domestic violence case, or just like, or if someone does steal something, but we don't think about why someone would do any of those actions. And I think that being an abolitionist is, you have to think about that. And it would be like, if we were to abolish the police, it would be to work to help out human beings who have different like mental health issues, or just like problems that would lead them to get arrested. And that also actually reminds me a lot of a quote that I saw like a few days ago, by Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who she's a prison abolitionist. But I think this message really applies to anyone who aspires to be an abolitionist or just think about abolition. But it says, abolition requires that we change one thing, which is everything. Abolition is not absence, it is presence. What the world will become already exists in fragments and pieces, experiments and possibilities. So those who feel in their gut deep anxiety that abolition means knock it all down, scorch the earth and start something new, let that go. Abolition is building the future from the present in all of the ways we can. And so, yeah, like I'm just thinking a lot about like us as youth, like we're all Black youth, and we're working towards, I would say that we're all working towards liberating ourselves. And a huge part of that is abolition. And so I also want to ask you all, in talking about our own like Black liberation, and as Black youth, how would you reimagine public safety?
I think specifically, the quote that you just shared by Ruth, I believe is the first name, it is fundamentally is saying abolition is an intersectional, belief system, an intersectional identity, because it's all interconnected. I mean, you mentioned in the beginning, before you prefaced the quote, you were saying, she's a prison abolitionist, or sorry, I don't know their pronouns, but you were saying they were a prison abolitionist, right? But I think, I would argue that a prison abolitionist just as much would be a police abolitionist, just as much would be a, military industrial complex abolitionist, because there's no way you can inextricably, look at one or examine one of those institutions without looking at how they affect each other, right? And it's so when I talk about how do we reimagine how do we reimagine public safety as a young person, as a young Black person, I think about, our generation wanting to be the last generation that has to look at concepts in a monolithic, bad apple, or an implicit bias training that needs to happen, or individual policy that needs to change to then have a better future. No, I mean, we're fed up with this bullshit. It's not really a time when we've seen our, elders do this work and push for this work. And, it's not their fault that it hasn't happened, really. It's the fault of the fact that there's not a collective unity behind it, that the whole world or the whole country is recognizing, this is an issue. I saw something that talked about in 2015, I think 43% of people believe racism was a systemic issue. And now 73% of people believe racism is a systemic issue. But, you still have that, 17% math, 27% that do not believe in systemic racism as an issue, right? They still believe that, the roots of our country are not on stolen land and not on stolen labor, right? And the folks that are leading this movement now, even the young folks and the adults, the Black women and the Black trans women and the Black trans sex workers who are doing this at the forefront of it, are tired. And I really, really hope that by the time I'm, 25, 30, I can look at this in a completely different light, because we've been able to move towards that. We've been able to elect the individuals who believe in Black lives, who believe Black lives matter, who believe Black trans lives matter. Those are the folks that will see those changes for. We need the people in this call to be elected officials. We need these people to be the folks making decisions, so that we can look at what our future is and reimagine what our future is, and not have it be some fantastical thing that isn't possible, right? It shouldn't have to be that way. It shouldn't have to be something that's so far-fetched. We should be able to look at public safety and reimagining that as something that we can see in our own future, and that we can have, our kids see be a reality.
I think public safety in general, there's just so many things that we can be rethinking and reshaping. Not every instance, or not every instance of harm, bodily, physically, emotionally, requires the police. And I think a big thing, there was the death of I don't know who it was specifically, but it was in Portland. They're responding to a person who was having a mental health breakdown because of the death of their brother. And police responded and they used force, and that man ended up dead. And so I think it's important to think about, maybe we put resources towards emergency responders who can respond to a situation and be there, trained in mental health. And then maybe we have social workers who respond to issues of domestic violence, and help communicate resources to those people that are experiencing these issues, right? Instead of having police who are trained to not necessarily de-escalate, but are trained to de-escalate with the use or the threat of force. And that threat of force, or that threat or facade or image of a police officer, one of a person with a badge and a gun who is ready and to use it, and things like qualified impunity and police unions, all of those things won't make sure that those people are held accountable if they misuse those things. And so we need to start thinking about how we protect people and how we keep people safe without them living in fear of the people that are supposed to be protecting them.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Kulu and Taji. Yeah, I do think that we need to reimagine public safety and what it looks like. You know, I think more like investing more in mental health resources. You know, so if someone's having a mental health crisis, you know, they can call someone who's actually, you know, who knows how to like deal with that. And I think also just for me, like how I see it in the future is like I hope that I don't have to like constantly live in fear when calling the police or like just being around police. Like I don't want to like have to feel like being fair. And I know that a lot of communities of color and Black folks and Black youth, they don't like there's a lot of trauma that they have that they got from police and the policing. So the way I imagine it in the future is like having less presence of police and just more community-based safety.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's just like it's unfair, just like you like in itself, like you said, like it's unfair that us as Black youth, you know, and yourself as a Black woman, that we have to fear the people who are meant to protect us. And I think that like that testimony in itself just shows how like this police system is not really meant for Black youth, and it's not meant for Black people. And also with abolition, like Taji, I really like that the point that you made with how it is intersectional. Like you can't have police abolition without prison abolition. And you can't have it without, you know, talking about the military or the prison industrial complex. And it makes me think a lot about I forgot who said it, but again, like another thing about abolition is that we need to get over like our obsession with punishment and wanting to punish people and put them in jail, because that's just the way that we look at justice. And I think that like one of the conversations or one of the things that I've had to like think about with myself is like, because like I think I myself also do sometimes have seen that as justice. Like if you killed someone, like you need to go to jail. But I think a huge part of abolition is like doing the work for yourself, to thinking about like what justice really means, and how to like how to address that when there are like problems, or when there are things like, you know, when there are a lot of like violent cases that happen, like how do you see justice for that person? And so like I think that's another question I can add, or if you all want to like chime in on that, but just like how do you how can we like address punishment in abolition work?
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like, so I followed this person on Instagram that's really just been like blowing up everything that I know to be true. You're doing great. They're a queer activist who like identifies with the fact that like the revolution will be TikTok anyway. Um, this activist like talked about the sentencings of officers and talked about the fact that justice for like Black individuals and people that experience state-sanctioned and white supremacist violence doesn't look like doesn't look like locking people up, because that won't solve the issues, right? Justice looks like reimagining a world where we don't have cops, like we don't have people who it's like their job to enforce laws with violence, like internally and inherently like capitalist and anti-Black laws, right? And then I think it's also important to note, like, it isn't fair. Dylan Roof, the guy who shot the Charleston Nine, was taken to Burger King before he had to go to prison. The man who was Jeremy Christian, the person who like perpetrated the Islamophobic attack of three women, and then the anti-Black attack of two other women, and ended up like killing two people by stabbing them in the neck, was like restrained as he like has like the knife that he used to kill these people in his hands. So like we definitely need to like reimagine how we do things, like reimagine our educational system. Like how are we bringing people up in this world? Like how are we teaching them to have like mutual respect? Like I don't know, like a lot of abolitionist work just revolves around like decolonizing of the mind and like realizing we've done things wrong for so long that we can't think that like flipping a switch or like reforming things is going to solve issues that have been around for like centuries before we have.
It's a very deep-seated issue, I think, and I think Asakulu very, poignantly talked about that. And it makes me think about, we're talking about accountability, and we're talking about a sort of concept that people have been talking a lot about is around arresting the cops that killed Breonna Taylor, and how it's been over 2 months since she was murdered on a no-knock arrest warrant to her house at 12 o'clock at night, and wanting to see them put in jail for the rest of their lives or killed for what they've done. And it doesn't, you are not an abolitionist if you're looking at the solution to police murder and police violence as locking up the individuals who did that, or stopping those individuals, or those looking at it once again monolithically, when in reality it's a cultural issue in policing when it comes to violence, and how they sort of tout violence by using violence, a fire with fire concept, if you will. And so you have to, I think, and Asakulu hinted at this as well, you have to prevent the system that handles things like public safety. And there was an instance why they even went to Breonna Taylor's house was around her relationship with her boyfriend, I believe. Why was it an officer who handled that situation at the first place? Why was it always, our direct solution to initiative of domestic violence is an officer to come in with a gun and then to kill a person? So it's not straightforward. It's not clear that it's too straightforward, quite frankly. It's too much like, here's an issue and here's our solution, and there's no really nuance to it. And we don't look at justice, and we don't look at that as prisons. We should look at it as a public education issue, that we'd have too many young people who grow up learning in schools how amazing Christopher Columbus was, how amazing Martin Luther King was in his peace mission and ideology, when in reality there's a lot more history and a lot more information that is not shared to the general population around people who are different, right? Like we talk about respect in as early as kindergarten, and people are talking about how important it is to teach that concept. And we have to talk about its relation to feminism, and how that how domestic violence exists and permeates with a lack of conversations around gender and sexuality. So it's really an issue with how we handle and how we aren't in a place where we've decolonized our education system.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's just so much work to do. And there's so much work that I think everyone, if they want to identify as an abolitionist, and I include myself in this as well, but there's just a lot of work for us to see the future that we want to see. Yeah. And so right now, what's going on locally with our local politics is, I know that with a lot of the protests, people were asking for city council to divest $50 million from the police, from the Portland Police Bureau. And I know that right now, I think what happened was they divested, I forgot how much, I believe it was $5 million. Do you know? How much was it?
It was 15 million.
15 million. And I see that, like, and I think, a lot of that work was led by, the only Black woman on city council, and also someone who I think believes in police reform. And I see that as a first step towards police abolition. But again, like, there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. And so my next question for you all is, what needs to happen in order for elected officials to prioritize Black voices? And specifically, I would say, Black youth voices.
I think, well, first they need to put more money towards, or I guess invest in organizations or nonprofits that are already like doing the work, such as like Taji's nonprofit, and there's also Word is Bond, and then there's the NYC's YAB committee. So yeah, I think definitely investing more in that kind of work and making sure that the Portland Police Bureau is also involved and on par with it, and kind of like making or prioritizing it. So I think that's like one of the first things that they need to do, and creating also more more like space for having these kinds of conversations. I also think that we need to look into investing or creating curriculum where, like, in schools in our public education system, where we can talk about, or where students are being taught about this, being taught about reformative work, or police abolition. I mean, I guess it doesn't have to be worded that way, but it's just so that students and so that students can learn at a young age what's really going on and how the policing system works here.
There's a lot of really good work happening in Oregon, and even I wouldn't say good is the best word to use, but I would think, someone like Joanne Hardesty is talking and looking very pragmatically at how we can direct funds away from policing. And she even mentioned in one of her tweets how she proposed a substantial cut last year during the budget conversations, and that to no avail at the time. And it's really important that we galvanize our elected officials to listen to our generation, as Ahlam mentioned. And I mean, locally, there is already, I believe, 7 million of the 50 million already allocated congruently with a ton of different organizations and places. And I would encourage everyone to look at Joanne Hardesty's Twitter page, and she sort of breaks it down by where it's going. And then there's another 8 million in contingency, which just means there's still potential for it to go other places, not like back to policing, but like just like they haven't decided where that's going yet. And we have a very particular group of oversight committees in Oregon, or in Portland specifically, that have been working on this: the Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing, the CRC, the Citizen Review Committee, and the Training Advisory Council. All of those groups, I would say, to some extent, to some extent, has oversight over the Portland Police Bureau. And those groups aren't necessarily replicated across all jurisdictions across the country. So it's really important to have oversight. And those oversight committees have a lot more say towards our politicians so that we can get our voices heard. So just making sure those oversight committees are representative of the communities that they're serving. So trying to make sure Black and Brown folks and Black women are on those committees. And I think we're working towards, oh gosh, is it lagging? I think we're working towards trying to give them more power in Oregon and Portland specifically. But on the state level, it's unfortunate that a lot of legislation has been diluted. They aren't banning chokeholds, they aren't banning chemical weapons, and it's just not as substantial as substantial policy as the community's demanding, and that's unfortunate, especially considering on a federal level as well. A lot of folks are not getting what we asked for from our government, especially in regards to qualified immunity and arbitration and police union power and accountability and use of force. Just across the board, we're not getting what we need. And so I really would encourage, voting is essential to making sure that we're having the elected officials who are going to listen to the community, who are going to pass things, not in the benefit of police unions, in the benefit of, corporations, but in the benefit of the people that they're supposed to be serving. So, and voting is essential to that. Having your voice heard, whether it's through, something like my organization, Youth Educating Police, or something like Word is Bond, or the Multnomah Youth Commission in their Youth Against Violence subcommittee. There's a ton of other great groups. Latino Network does some work with their CHI program, Community Health Initiative. And so, if you want to get tapped in, there's a lot of great outlets to do that on a grassroots level, but also just, I always encourage and want to see that we have young people coming to the polls. A mayoral race is happening this fall, so we'll have a huge shift in things if that changes. So yeah, that would be my biggest things. I don't know how much I lagged because I'm lagging on my camera, so I'm assuming it didn't come out the best.
Heard you. I'd agree with Taji. I think I would also go as far as saying also organizing and as he said, getting involved with groups that are organizing. We'll always have politicians that don't care about us, and we'll have politicians that do. But my view of politics right now may be pretty cynical, but the fact that a lot of politicians they use words like compromise and things we need to come together on this, when it's you don't need a compromise when it comes to someone's life. And I think that was my biggest thing, watching the city council meetings and hearing them talk about the vote as if they're not essentially deciding the future of Black lives within our city, and how we're going to be protected. And so I did appreciate the efforts of Joanne, but I also think that we need to hold our elected officials accountable. We need to hold them to a higher standard. I think a big thing that we saw with, politicians that we identify with in general is this lessening of critique on them, when we should be just as critical, if not more, because we don't have enough representation, right? And so once we get that representation, what are they doing to actively fight for us? How are they building bridges? How are they bringing people in and calling people in and telling these people this is what y'all should be caring about? And so we need to be holding them accountable. And so that's where I think organizing and getting involved with youth groups and things like that is super important. I'm working with a collective of Black youth under Fridays for Freedom. And so we're planning youth-led marches, but we're also putting together a list of demands for our decision makers within our city, whether that is Portland Public Schools supervisors or Portland City Council or Oregon State legislators, putting those demands at the forefront of everything that we do, and marching and making sure that they actually understand that we're going to be holding them accountable and we're going to vote for them, right? And we're going to vote, and it's important that we do vote, but past the vote, what are you doing to make sure that you're affirming my life matters, and Black lives matter, all Black lives. How are you making sure that all Black lives matter in our city? How are you going beyond you talking about it is super important.
There's and for folks who are interested in finding out more information about the state of Portland and Oregon in general around policy and around what's happening and what's changing, specifically because there's a lot of moving pieces with the school resource officer specifically, and we're working around the clock trying to figure out what's happening there, because there's conversations on sort of taking back their sentiment and wanting to have them in our schools in one capacity or another. So a lot of really interesting stuff happening. So I'm working with a work group with Representative Akasha Lawrence Spence, and we're trying to get some sort of educational zine of sort together for Portland, specifically in Oregon, what just happened out of the special session, and trying to make sure you can, stay informed. And so that should be coming soon as well. And so we'll try to get that, disseminated to as many folks as possible. But, the information is never ending. And I always encourage folks to make sure they're taking care of themselves. And I should be giving myself that advice as well. But yeah, it's definitely important work. And it's really important that you're encouraging your friends. Era we're in right now, and a lot of the leaders who've been waiting for this, folks like Angela Davis, have been saying, this is a new frontier that we're at, and we really have to continue to push our elected officials. I agree with Asakulu, past the point of saying, we'll talk with you and we'll have a conversation with you. I mean, it was proven last Thursday, at the North Precinct in Portland, that community members are fed up with the inaction that's happening from the city, and the 15 million is 35 million too short, right? Or the policies are still not working for the people, and putting in a Black chief does not change policing, and making a video of people speaking in multiple languages and calling that, that's just not, that was comical, to say the least, in the sense of like showing change, like yeah, I don't know. And I was supposed to meet with the mayor on Friday, and he's canceling that as well, like pushing things when he's like, oh, I'm gonna listen to the community, and you're not listening to the community when you have 2-week schedule ahead meetings for changes and things we're working on. That's not happening. And the community, and it was with PSEP, and groups are not getting the things that they were being promised, and we're not being able to push the change we want to push when we're getting these false promises. So I would encourage folks to consider, always, wanting the more bodies, the better, and making sure you're going to protest, making sure you're listening to information. I know we still have another question, but I just wanted to make sure that's still out there.
Yeah, no, definitely. So yeah, I think you all talked about like different ways, or the different work that you all are doing. And so how can people support and also get involved in the work that you all are doing? What ways can people show support and get involved?
Definitely, like if you're one of those folks who are learning all about this right now, definitely look into any organizations that are already doing the work, like what Taji said, and join them and help them organize, because a lot of these organizations do not have that many people, or don't have as much people as there is out there that are protesting. So join organizations. Definitely continue to support youth, especially youth of color and Black youth, who have been doing most of the work and organizing, and continue to push politicians and apply pressure, because it's definitely working. And yeah, so yeah, I think one of like the best things to do is to join organizations that are already doing the work, just so that there's some level of organizing going on and strategic planning. So
Okay, sweet. Did y'all want to add anything? Or?
Yeah, I didn't know if Asakulu was gonna go. Do you want me to go first? It's fine.
Yeah, you can go.
You can go.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we for folks who are looking for outlets, Youth Educating Police, we have folks who are sticking in Portland working. We'll be doing work in other cities, more specifically Chicago and Philadelphia, but we still have a lot of good roots in Oregon, and our Portland director would love more support and team working with us here. So definitely, you know, we have our website. You could also just connect with me on my social media and DM me or something. I'm not like I respond to everyone. I don't I don't get people who like think they have more important things to do than respond. So yeah, I love responding and talking with folks, especially just like, you know, I had my friend in Oklahoma reach out and was just asking like, you know, what is police abolition, talking about what is police reform. And I love talking with folks about that, especially those who are interested. And if you're, you know, really passionate about this work and want to find ways to utilize your skill set or find ways to build your skill set in grassroots organizing and stuff like that, I would encourage you to, you know, reach out. And there's a lot of groups that are doing work around protests. And so if you're interested in that, Fridays for Freedom is a great one, Snack Block, Don't Shoot PDX, and there's marches, Portland Resistance. There's a march on July 3rd and July 10th. Come out and, you know, make sure your voice is being heard, and for a long-term basis, joining those organizations and getting involved there as well is really helpful. We love, folks who are interested and want to continue this work in Portland and beyond.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you all for, you know, for naming those organizations, and just, you know, for continuing to do all the great work that you all do. And so my last question for you all, and kind of like a closing statement, but it's just like, what future are you fighting for? Like, you know, we talked a lot about abolition, and I think abolition is a step towards liberation. And I think that, and, you know, like me and Askula talked about this a few weeks ago, but like, we kind of talked about it today, but like, I think abolition is a step to Black liberation, considering the fact that Black people are disproportionately in prisons and over policed. And so I just want to ask you all, like, what future are you fighting for? And yeah.
I'll start because I have to head out in a second, but I want to just say, yeah, thank you so much, Faisal and Ahlam and Asakulu for, you know, sitting with and talking with me. But I would say the future that I'm fighting for is one of liberation. I mean, you mentioned that specifically, but it's also, you know, one where justice is not some far-fetched, out of the reach concept where, you know, government works for the people, not, you know, next to or against, where we have elected officials that have transparency, where we have, you know, classrooms where we learn about, you know, queer liberation and Black liberation and, you know, origins of colonialism and so many things, where we focus on, you know, a people's understanding of America, people's understanding of a democracy, and really getting to those roots, where we're liberated and where a revolution is a daily thing, and that we can, you know, always look for, always have our voice heard from the bottom to the top. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I am fighting for Black liberation and just liberation of all, you know, oppressed people. I think like right now, like that seems very far fetched, but it's something that I will continue working towards, you know, every day. And I envision a future where Black communities are not dealing with or having to deal with trauma, you know, because that passes down to like different generations. And yeah, so I hope more politicians listen to Black folks and really invest in Black voices, so, and Black communities.
Yeah, 100%. Askulu?
I'm sorry. Um, Yeah, I would just agree with everyone else. Black liberation, but definitely just like a future where like we can clearly affirm that like Black Lives Matter, and we don't need to like use that phrase. Like our definitions of justice like enforce that, like our definitions of public safety enforce that. And just like from direct experience, like working for like my people, like all Black people across the world, but definitely also just like working to amplify the voices of other oppressed groups. Um, and working towards a world where someone's profession or someone's um, life doesn't have to be defined by the circumstances that oppress them, right? Like a world where we can just live freely and openly and equitably is the world that I'm fighting for. And I may not achieve it, but hopefully my grandbabies do.
So basically, a world without police. That's what we're looking. That's what we're working towards.
Mhm.
It is
Definitely.
a constant struggle. Yeah.
Hmm.
As Angela Davis said. I didn't quote. That's not my quote.
Yeah. Again, thank you all for being on this panel today. I really appreciated this conversation that we had today. And before we end it, I really want people to, stay connected with you all. And so, Taji, before you leave, can you how can people, just like stay connected to what you do? What are your social media tags
Yeah.
that people can look at or follow?
I just muted myself. Yeah, it's just my first and last name. Nothing special on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. I don't know.
Okay, so that's at Taji Chesimet.
Yeah, at Taji Chesimet. And then if you're interested in youth educating police, it's just youtheducatingpolice.org. And we have social, but we mostly communicate verbally. Social media is not our biggest forte.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, just make sure to follow them and stay connected with them. And then Asakulu.
So my usernames are like all over the place, but basically just like if you type in Asakulu Sungolo, you'll find me. My nonprofit Congo Peace Project is just Congo Peace Project Instagram, then Congo Peace on Twitter, Congo Peace Project Facebook, and Asakulu Sungolo on Facebook. And then Fridays for Freedom is just Fridays, and then 4 instead of like that, like the number 4 instead of the like actual word for freedom on Instagram. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, awesome.
So I mainly use Instagram and Twitter. My Instagram is ahlam.pdf, so ahlam.pdf. And I have a Facebook. I can stop and follow me on there too. It's just Ahlam Osman. And then my Twitter is honey bun is honey bun girl. But yeah, I mean, yeah.
All right, sweet. Yeah, again, thank you all. Round of applause for just all of your responses today and how knowledgeable you all are. And yeah, you guys are all great. Thank you all again for being on here and going through this with me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having a platform.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
of course. Thank you all.
See ya.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.